to the Michael Brooks Show. We're broadcasting live from our different spots in Brooklyn, which, without really disclosing any details, we've all left much more often in the last couple of days than we have in months. This week's program, labor organizer, political tactician, Chucka Ejeckam joins us. Matt Chrisman, Cushbomb from Chapo Trap House, and TMBS crew in the postgame, the great Artesia Ball Throp. We've got the fat fuck trying to declare martial law. We have uprisings across the country, insurrections, protests, many of them peaceful, police rioting everywhere, a military chopper flying low to the ground in Washington, D.C. Very comforting that that person followed that order. A president, a massive cuck who fled to a bunker, then had a temper tantrum, attempted to do national martial law, and achieved it in Washington, D.C. because, in a pretty connected theme, Washington, D.C. does not have statehood. So it can be federally terrorized, including hounding people in their homes and apartments. This might end up really bad. Can't sugarcoat it. Can't have a fantasy about it. It's also, frankly, a relief that at a certain point of pressing people, they go out. So we're going to try to absorb it, analyze it, provide you guys with context, and do our best here. All of us have been dealing with this in our own ways, and I'll say, no glory here, but when I go out to these things, I don't usually take a phone, so I'm not sort of documenting it, but I can tell you that. And I want to be very clear here. I have no problem. If you want to have a criticism of tactics and you want to debate what is the most effective thing in terms of national messaging, people need to be able to be adults and have those debates. Absolutely. And if you are in media and you are framing this as anything other than enormous police violence and repression, almost like the way a cartel might respond if one of their spots got hit, then you are fundamentally misrepresenting it.
Including the way they're attacking you as journalists. Right?
Attacking you as journalists, popping rubber bullets at MSNBC reporters, using the technocracy to time the tear gassing of peaceful protesters yesterday so he can waddle over to the church. And yes, I'm body shamed and will continue to do so. Look, there's a lot to get to. I want to open it up though. We'll get to Chuka pretty soon, but what are you guys' feelings, thoughts, impressions? I will say too, being out, again, I can't give a bedtime story. I don't know where this goes. I think some people are shitting on this from an armchair, which I think is disgusting. I think some people are valorizing and romanticizing some things that, frankly, in their economic positions, they absolutely should not. And I think some people are getting ahead of themselves with where this all goes. But the word, I feel, you don't control the conditions that arise. And being, out there to any degree, including, again, not stealing any valor here, but really to any degree, felt necessary. What do you guys, thoughts, feedback, anything, guys?
I think the outside agitators have really outdone themselves the past few nights. I think it is kind of... there's so many different kind of indicators, right? I marched down Flatbush on Saturday with folks, And the amount of support we're getting from just people in the high rises next to it and the cars in the lane, is universal. And then on the way back, we saw like how quickly that protest, which, you know, somebody in the group was saying that we were sort of with the MLK protesters, and behind us were the Malcolm X protesters that were getting right up in cops' faces, because this is a anti-cop protest, getting right up in their faces, telling them to resign, doing all that stuff. And then you see a lot of people have seen the video of the cop car that tried to learn the wrong lesson from Charlottesville, basically on Flatbush Ave, and rammed those protesters. They have there's some kind of there's a knowledge of impunity here with cops behind the wheel, because they were doing that way before. The reason those protesters blocked that car off from going through that intersection was because the cops were swerving in right behind them and basically corralling protesters and trying to split them up, trying to split those two groups of protesters up. They're using like sheepdog, like that's how they're using their vehicles. And the protesters rightly got in their way and said, "You're not going to do that." And it's like the mixed indicators are from like how fragmented our society is, because on Twitter, right, we all see these images, we all see this stuff. It's not getting through to, I think, people who consume the world mainly through local television news or even cable news, for instance. But I also think the media environment is different than, say, 50 years ago, which is that I think, you know, this disaster of a Blackout Tuesday campaign where people put the black square, like, and so I guess like I don't have anywhere to summarize all this stuff, but that's what I've observed.
I think you're right, especially on that last point. I think what's really interesting about this movement, you know, I'm just thinking about other major like Black Lives Matter movements or like mass protests that we saw, you know, sort of sister rallies across the country. I mean, this is the unprecedented spread. I mean, even compared to basically, you know, the solidarity rallies happened with Ferguson, where like there was some police violence in other cities, but it's really concentrated in one area. I think that it's really fascinating that all across the country, we're seeing this kind of harsh crackdown from the police when you see that violence. I mean, you know, you can talk about political education and being well read, all that you want, but like literally, like there's the life and death moment where you're like, God, these armed people are like attacking this group of protesters. And that's like, you know, it's a real like political awakening for a lot of people. And just because it's so widespread, like, you know, almost every major city, you know, people in my family back in Texas were, you know, sending me videos of the cops just walking down their street in their like residential neighborhood. Right. And that's a really powerful image to see, like, because it looks like an occupying army. So I feel like, you know, a lot of people really are getting this kind of awareness that they might have not had if they were to be watching it just happening in other cities. When it's happening right in front of you, it starts to become a lot clearer and a lot more visceral. But I don't know. I feel like this is going to be really hard for them to be able to put away. I think that they're going to try their best to come up with these narratives to try to discredit the movement. And you can see, you know, from in certain places, you know, where like just like in the marches that I've been on so far, where they're starting those kind of fragmentation, those ideas of like the outside agitator, like there is a kind of general paranoia, not dominant, but you can just sort of see it coming up, erupting here and there. And like we need to do our best to make sure that that does not become the dominant story, because that's very clearly is a way to try to make sure, you know, to divide these movements, when what we really need to be doing is continuing to see them grow, which in an encouraging way they have continued, and they just like really haven't stopped. In Houston today, there was another massive protest that just continued to grow throughout the day, and I don't think that they're going to be able to put this away without literally going to the most repressive apparatus of the state, which could be a very real possibility.
And again, and that's happening.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's, again, why when you pull back tactically and you do look at the same dynamic accelerated, which is a completely dead, I mean, you know, of course, the response from Pelosi and Schumer is embarrassing and a failure, just as you'd expect. There's a handful of people on pure civil libertarian grounds in that national leadership, Senator Ron Wyden as an example, who understands and is focused on certain aspects of the overall civil liberties threat, right? Mm-hmm. And then you got a White House and a national Republican leadership that wants to do this. You have seen over the past several years numerous Republican legislative initiatives at state houses to, as an example, let it be legal for people to run their own fucking cars through crowds of protesters. That was already in play. That was already happening. The hiring of private mercenary and paramilitary firms. And again, a left that is still very weak relative to these other forces. So yeah, I mean, absolutely they're going to pull out the most repressive metrics, and absolutely they think they can do it. So there's no doubt about it. And to speak to what you're saying, David, I want to play this clip of this cop. I think he's in Greenwich Village.
Yeah.
And just as an example of the conspiracy theories, the outside agitator, and the divisiveness, let's just play this clip real quick.
One moment, sorry.
No, it's all good.
Here we go.
Us and everything that these cops have given their blood for, and the communities that we serve and they all love, can go back together and get those groups out of here from California, from all over this country, who are being paid to take this movement, which is a good movement, and turn it into violence against the men and women who love the communities. So that's the first.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just absolutely no basis for this. There's none. I mean, this is a conspiracy theory. Mm-hmm. And again, I have no problem. You want to criticize different tactics, you want to criticize different groups, I'm all for it. I'm not going to forward it right now, frankly. But of course, I think certain tactics are stupid. Of course, I think certain approaches, especially if you come from certain backgrounds, are foolish. But at the same time, and primarily, this is a lie. This is bullshit. And what is he talking about? Like, this leads me to another point. It really drives me crazy to see the deep abuse and propaganda deployment of things that actually have a certain deep value if we get there. Let me explain what I mean. We didn't even pull this. Well, let me start first with cops taking the knee across the country. First of all, come on, people. We all know that that's a coordinated PR tactic. You know that. This is like literally counterinsurgency. And then there was some clips of protesters getting arrested in Minneapolis. And this so happened to be, maybe we'll play it later. Max Blumenthal, I think, was clipping it on Twitter. This so happened to be, relatively speaking, insofar as somebody taking control of your body like that and cuffing you, a pleasant arrest. The cops were speaking with the arrestees were speaking with the cops, with the protesters. There was this local news reporter on the ground who couldn't believe it. This is amazing. Look at them. They're getting arrested and they're talking it out. And he even got some footage of the protesters being arrested saying some things like, we're all human. We all want to get home to our families. We all, X, Y, and Z. That is true. That is true. And the act of evoking such deep values during an arrest like that is the most deep perversion imaginable. It'd be like during the ANC struggle. You're getting arrested by these apartheid security forces. And you're recognizing that you're both part of the same human family. Well, okay, you can recognize that after the system has been dismantled. So if these cops were taking off their badges and were resigning on the spot, cool. That's beautiful. Have that conversation. And some cops are resigning. But the idea that you take, and this is also going to show up in the polls. See, there's one group of people we know, predominantly in the Republican base. They're authoritarians. They want this war at home. Mm-hmm. They want all the shit the United States empire does overseas. So the connections that we draw, they want that, and they want that accelerated. So they love that garbage that fuck was bloviating about last night. Then there's some people who I think you're right, David. I think they're getting more aware. And this is on top of many things, the police murders, the systemic police violence along racist and class-driven lines, the relationship between the way, frankly, many of us just live in these major cities and the legacy of modern policing. And then on top of it, of course, that we're in a Great Depression and a pandemic, and there's a complete failure of leadership, and we're not doing shit. So there's a lot bubbling. Then there's a contingent of people that, you know, it's like they want that normal. They want that, you know, it's the same conflict in the polling you see. There's increased polling, like 60% of people, the protests are right. 50% of people, they want the military out. Yes, we need police reforms, but we shouldn't cut police budgets. And when you find footage, as they will do, that speaks to those very deep human sentiments, which are correct, but skip the whole process of getting through justice to get there in terms of actual policy changes, not just kind of, again, this is why it's not about personal shit. It's about policy. It's about political change. It's about material change. It's not about personal moralization. Those really deep impulses are going to get abused and perverted. So please, and I'm sure many of you aren't, but please do not do police PR.
Yeah. Jesus.
Please do not do police PR.
You know, and I'm just saying, like, it's striking to me, though. I will say this as somebody who's been around, you know, many Republicans in my life. You know, they talk just like liberals do, you know, privately about love, and like their politics are about love and community and all this kind of garbage, and not garbage, but like, you know, it's just like there's no weight behind it. So like the police are just as capable of coming out and being like, we love everybody, we don't see skin color, whatever. And just, you know, Donald Trump does the same thing sometimes, right?
Donald Trump said he was honoring George Floyd while he was giving his martial law speech.
Exactly.
And we have the police scanners of these NYPD guys talking about shooting and running over people. Shooting and running over people, which they are all over the country. I mean, we've had police riots for several days now.
Yeah, but you know, again, I'll just say I highly suggest, you know, if you're in an area where you're able to participate in these movements, you know, coming out and joining. I don't know. I've been like major events that I've been in my life, like from Occupy to like I was at J20 in DC, and I don't know what the vibe is like in DC, but this has really had such a powerful energy to it that I think is actually quite unique. And most of these street movements that I've been a part of have been too. But there was a real sense of actual, like, I don't know, approaching some kind of consensus as like a mass versus like a lot of the other movements that I've been to where they've been very fragmented across the board. I still think strategically and like how we're going to organize and do something with this, there's still that question. But I don't know, like the commitment is certainly there. The commitment is really there in a way that I have not seen very often in my life.
Yeah. Let's see. Whew. Yeah, it's just a lot. It's a lot.
Even the mutual aid has been amazing.
Definitely. That's really unique with protests in terms of the bottled water and hand sanitizer and handing out masks and all of that.
And bail funds getting more money than they can.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, go ahead, David.
I was just saying the police have been targeting some of those mutual aid centers in other cities I've seen too, because they know that those are actually very effective. Do you know anything about military strategy, for example? Like the first thing you do is you shut off the supply chain, and the police understand that that's something that they have to knock out.
Yeah, there's multiple videos of them dumping water out.
Exactly.
There's multiple videos of them dumping water out. Absolutely. And again, I want to just stress, this is about institutions. It is really not about individuals. And that, you know, it's funny because that, I realize that hits me so hard because it goes both ways. Because I do, again, I criticize and I think it's counterproductive and stupid, the whole moralistic culture in general. Mm-hmm. But it also helps moments like this. Of course, we are absolutely inseparable as human beings. I have no doubt. There is one human family. I'm a fucking hippie. And at the same time, unless you have a material action to back that right now, your function is out of place. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, look, I'm glad that the dude in Flint, I'm glad the police chief in Flint, I'm glad his personal attitude is let's co-opt this instead of kick in heads. That's better than kicking in heads. And I think, again, this is what annoys me. Let's be real. Better to see that footage than kicking in heads. But then you see people sharing that, and it's like, what are you doing? Mm-hmm. What are you doing? Yeah. Because and again, I'll be really practical. The police chief said, hey, let's march. then let's have a town meeting about what this police department can do. We won't accept military hardware anymore. We won't, whatever the case may be. If it's not that, if it's all in this game of symbolism, and that's why, of course, corporations can co-opt this stuff, and corporations can absorb this rhetoric, because if you play at that symbolic level, whether it's posturing in rage and indulging that, or posturing in this false unity, I'm telling you, it's both bullshit.
Yeah. I think the way, like, it's important for people, just with my general advice to that person who might be considering sharing something like that, or like amplifying that message. If you feel solidarity with this movement and these actions, and you're participating in them, you need to think of yourself and everybody in this movement. What we're doing right now is we're making a demand to the state. We're making a demand to, like, the police department, and everything that you do is a part of this very crucial life and death negotiation. And if you've ever been in a negotiation, they always are going to try to lowball you. Literally, the cops coming out saying we love everybody is the lowest offer that they will ever give you, right? Do not accept that crap from them, right? You need to understand that you are a member of a collective group of people, and you can't accept a nonsense solution to a very serious material problem that needs material action, not symbolic action at all. We've had years now of powerful people coming out, as we just said, Donald Trump saying that he is honoring the life of George Floyd. That's nonsense when Donald Trump says that. We should not accept that as anything that we're trying to get from him. What we want is to see the police department get radically demilitarized and defunded. We do not want to live in a society.
Absolutely. There needs to be significant budget cuts. It needs to be demilitarized. And we need to also disaggregate what these jobs even are. And again, I'm not going to jump on slogans that I don't think are effective, because I still see the polls. And I want this shit to actually track. But I have been asking people, and frankly have been for quite some time, and with increasing urgency, why do you think first of all, obviously, no domestic force, if you even take just the Constitution seriously, should be militarized. Secondly, why do you have somebody who theoretically is trained to deal with the most serious shit? There's a shootout. There's a fucking murder. There's something that needs to be solved and figured out. Why are they called in for shoplifting? Why are they called in if somebody is having a nervous breakdown? What are they doing in schools? What the fuck? It's ludicrous. It's delusional. And frankly, you can talk to police too. They'll say the same thing. Why am I a truant officer? Why am I a social worker? Why am I all of these things? And then, and we'll get to Chuka in a second, but then of course you see the other reality here, that they have been empowered over, particularly the last 20 years policy-wise, which we'll continue to tease out. We're going to have Cedric Johnson on soon. I'd really strongly recommend that everybody watch this incredible talk on policing reform and against the technical solution, which he gave a couple years ago. And again, he's getting into the material roots of this stuff. Also, Adolph Reed has a fantastic piece in Non-Site. The point is, of course, the reason you add the class dimension to it is because you also have to recognize that as much as there are individually despicable people, like these fucking murderers of George Floyd, that this way of policing, this way of paramilitarizing, terrorizing communities of color, and policing all poor people is inseparable from how we do our cities today. And how we do our cities today is inseparable from how we've leverage certain market forces. So you have to materialize it to solve it. Period. And again, you have, as part of this context, you could see that these institutions have power beyond the people that are supposed to regulate them. Somebody tweeted, these motherfuckers, look, Bill de Blasio is a joke. These motherfuckers doxed his daughter.
Yeah.
They doxed his daughter. What situation you have when the democratically elected mayor of a city has a paramilitary force that's driving people through, driving cars into people, beating the shit out of people, escalating all over the place. His daughter gets arrested, and they dox her. You don't see the strain, the fact that you're already talking out of the bounds of democracy here, and it's only getting accelerated again with this silly fuck trying to do martial law. But look, let's do a little wrap, and then we'll get to Chucka Ejeckam. I don't see you guys anymore for some reason. Is there a reason? Did you guys take yourselves off? Or
Oh no, we're still there.
it's weird. I don't know. I'm doing it over phone today.
Yeah, and just a note also while you say that, the internet's been crazy the last few nights, I think, because of all the activity in this area, because I'm actually pretty close to it, Barclays Center.
You're right.
So we had a brief drop. I don't think anybody even noticed it, but just in case something happens, we'll try to get back up as soon as possible tonight, everybody.
Okay, word. All right, so here's what we're gonna do. Let's talk a little bit about, look, obviously I believe very strongly in the work we do. We had a drop off this month for very obvious reasons, nothing radical, but we do need to hold steady and frankly continue to grow. That's how bills are paid. That's how people are supported. That's how we expand out. We just unlocked the latest illicit history doc of Thomas Sankara, incredible history and narration by the absolutely one-of-a-kind Milton Alamati, part of this constellation of extraordinary human beings that we work with. It's deeply inspiring and deeply depressing, frankly, but I would recommend that everybody watch it as well as you watch all the illicit histories, all of our content. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of episodes of introductions to theory, history, and the postgame that you guys are just going to have an incredible time with. So if you're in a position, especially as some people are dropping for financial reasons, if you find yourself in this position, we need you to join today because we need to keep growing and we need to get to that 4,000 patron goal. So go to patreon.com/TMBS. If you're watching this now and you want to hit us with a super chat, that would be great. Please hit like. We don't know yet. We're actually looking for suggestions because we know that some bail funds, like as an example, Minneapolis and Brooklyn, are overstocked at the moment. We're going to give a portion of this month's Patreon to frontline organizations, including bail networks. We're still figuring out the logistics of that, but we're going to give some, and we'd like recommendations as to who to give to. So we're definitely open to feedback on that. That's something that we're going to be doing this month, and obviously we all feel really strongly about. Go to patreon.com/TMBS, become a patron today. We need you, and we'll keep growing, and we'll keep doing what we must do. I think, guys, if everything's okay and we're all set, I think we could bring Chuka in. Unfortunately, I don't think I'll be seeing him. I don't see any of you. But
let's just take a real quick break, and then we'll come on with Chuka.
All right, we'll take a real quick break. Okay, we'll be right back. Hey, everybody, we're back. Having technical problems to the point where I'm almost having a Sam moment. If you're if you're majority report as well. God damn it!
That
was a very authentic impression.
I'm surprised you went with the Sam Cedar as opposed to the Bill O'Reilly.
Oh, right. Fuck it. We'll do it. No, yeah, do it live.
Yeah, we'll do it live.
But that's all an abstraction to me. I've seen the Sam freakouts, and I've prided myself on playing it cool, but not tonight. I've had a series of fucking problems. But regardless, I'm very honored to have friends, great returning guests to the show, Chucka Ejeckam. Check out our previous episode on the future of the global labor movement in Patreon. Chucka, thank you so much for doing this. How are you?
I'm all right. Thank you. And thanks for inviting me.
Of course. I'm very happy to have you back. It's been too long. I do have some specific questions for you, but honestly, this is one of those times where just, start with impressions, energy, where you're at, whatever.
It's obviously I don't live in the US. And so it's one thing there are issues of deep-seated and entrenched racism in Canada against Black people, against Indigenous people, of course, during the pandemic, there's also increasing acts of like outwardly expressed racism against Asian communities. So I'm not at all saying that Canada doesn't have these issues at all, or Canada doesn't have these issues of its own. But the what's occurring right now in the U.S., it is certainly difficult to see, and then difficult to watch without being able to kind of directly involve yourself in what's happening. One thing that's sticking out to me lately is the increasingly aggressive responses, not just from police, but from like Republican legislators. Like I think Tom Cotton mentioned something about giving no quarter to protesters. So effectively arguing for them to be executed by the military. Matt Gaetz tweeted that after Trump said that Antifa was going to be declared a terrorist organization, he tweeted that he said something like, "Oh, if we now consider Antifa terrorists, can we hunt them down the way we do in the ones in the Middle East?" Which is, I mean, so does he want to fly Predator drones over U.S. cities now? I mean, he certainly does, but is he actually going to push that forward? And then, of course, Trump with when the looting starts, the shooting starts. It seems that they are not just like voicing the sentiment, but I don't know. I'm wondering when the time will come that they actually put this into action.
Well, I think they can already, like, in terms of even, like some people are sort of getting off on, well, how could you do that with Antifa? It's a tactic, not an organization, whatever. And it's like, well, actually precisely because it is a general, all amorphous, all encompassing tactic, makes it all the more effective for an across the board assault on every type of civil liberty. And this comes on top of, I was talking about at the top of the show, Republican state legislatures across the country have passed legislation to make people doing nonviolent disobedience, civil disobedience, culpable for even like losses of business revenue. It's a bit different now because obviously everybody's outside masked mostly, and you're supposed to be. There's been legislation against that as well. And that, by the way, and again, like, people really need to understand that if you're kind of trying to preserve some anonymity while you do this has nothing to do, like, you could be there, like, not doing anything violent whatsoever. You just don't want to be aggressively surveilled by the national security apparatus. So yeah, just to kind of echo what you're saying, yes. I mean, they're getting very, and I also, what do you make of the fact too that, like, just that basic thing that they're going to push hard on the right, the Democratic Party, the center, it just isn't even there, right? Like, they're like Schumer and Pelosi, please, right? Like, it's not even, I'm not even saying that to criticize them. Honestly, like, hope springs eternal, but it's not even there. And the left is very weak. So what do you think of that kind of general dynamic? It's difficult for me to imagine what the Democratic Party's response would be in a time like this, because they have to, based on the way we've seen them operate for years now, they will of course, fret about the protests, fret about property damage, and say, well, we understand the issue, but any kind of violence is unacceptable. And destroying your own city is unacceptable, things like that. They've intentionally avoided advancing any kind of structural critique about where these issues come from or how they have to be dealt with, because that would not only implicate them, but implicate the policies that they've been pursuing since the new Democrat era. Right.
So, and in terms of in terms of supporting people who are arguing for even defunding the police, right, which is a legislative solution, and it is a proposal. It is a strong proposal, but it is also a legislative solution. And there are a lot of people who are not arguing for legislative solutions, right, who are arguing for something a lot more direct. So I imagine that they won't even go as far as supporting those people, because they're still worried about being perceived as radical and weak, right, and they're clearly still kind of trying to. They see their electoral fortunes in the center, which I don't know why, I don't know how, but it's clearly how they understand themselves and how they want to not just attempt to seize power in the sort of larger political system, but also within the party maintain power against the new people who are entering it, who are much to the left of the people who are currently in the top positions. So I just don't see what they can do. anything that gives support, that gives too much support to the protesters, will be eschewed by the party. Anything that clearly gives support to the police, and it will be just completely overshadowed by what the Republicans are going to do. So I don't know what they could say that would be of value, and I don't see anything they say having a lot of purchase.
What about the role of the labor union movement in terms of both the incredible acts of solidarity we saw with bus drivers in various cities refusing to cooperate with police raids, and then also really attaching a big, concrete policy agenda to this? We talked already, obviously, radically slashing police budgets, but also starting to connect it to healthcare, job guarantee, and all the rest of it. What is the bridge, and what is the role, and how can labor get into the mix and get centered?
So yeah, I think there's an interesting dichotomy in the sort of labor actions that we've seen related to the protest. Of course, it is, like bus drivers or transit workers in New York and in Minneapolis have been refusing to work with the police. And also notably, their unions have supported them, encouraging drivers to not work with the police and putting up statements in support of the protests. And then on the other side, you've seen the New York Police Union tweeting out information about the mayor's daughter after she was arrested.
They doxed the mayor of New York's daughter.
Exactly, including her address, right? Which is just an extreme action that directly endangers her life. So I think that the stuff that we've seen from transit unions is incredibly compelling, and in terms of where there's the labor movement could see work in related to this. Obviously, if you defund, people who argue or in the argument for defunding police and defunding prisons, it isn't just that the money disappears, it's that it's put toward community services, right? Community care services, caregiving, community support organizations, community recreation, and enlivenment initiatives and things like that. And so all of that creates work that doesn't set up an opposition between the worker and the rest of the public, right? It's not work that comes with punitive power, with the power to take life, with the power to imprison and cage and brutalize, with the power to use measures that are considered torture in international law, like solitary confinement. So I think that those, and all of that is, and you can have sort of wraparound services and a much greater array of support services and institutions and initiatives and programs that don't just attempt to actually deal with issues that people experience in a way that doesn't dehumanize and endanger those people, but also just makes life better, right? Makes the world that we inhabit more livable, more pleasant, and more like the world that we would construct from scratch. And so I think that it's both, morally right. It is the right thing to do. And it also creates work and builds solidarity in communities. And so that is the position that I take. And those are the things that I argue for.
How important do you think it is to have a clear set of policy demands?
I think it depends what conversation you're having. If you're putting forward an agenda to someone who will actually listen, like if you have a government that is somewhat amenable to where you're coming from and has some power to actually put something forward, then yeah, I think it makes sense to have a clear set of policy demands. I don't think that the onus is necessarily on advocacy organizations or organizers to itemize every single policy and have the specific budget line and how much it would take, how much it would cost, and exactly how many jobs would be created and exactly what the administration would look like. I think that's an undue burden. And from outside of the administrative power of the public service, it's difficult to develop all of that. But I do think it makes sense to have detailed proposals when you can, and when there's a chance of those details being put into practice. I think when you're arguing against the government that absolutely will not listen to you, and you're trying to build support for the ideas, then I think it also makes sense, and perhaps makes more sense, to talk about the larger vision, to speak from a place of values and principles, so that you can kind of establish those first principles and then build the policies beyond that. Because of course, if you talk about police or prison abolition, a lot of people they have an immediate instinctual rejection to the idea. And so then if you begin the conversation with a discussion of particular policies and administrative mechanisms, then I don't know that you'll be able to get them on side. So I think in some cases, you have to kind of get people on side with a more fundamental conversation and then go forward into specific detailed policy development.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think the relationship is, though, between like there is this fusion from basically like the most surveilled, abused, murdered, terrorized populations in the country. Then there's this sort of like adjacent, very professional managerial class, which, you know, I always have my criticisms of. And there's definitely some kind of vicariousness going on. And I think there's a very big difference between, you know, it's just like my bottom line point that if an action arises from a context, I just don't have a comment on it, right? It's just not my place. And I don't even mean that to like, that's not even like a curry favor. It just really isn't a comment I have. You know, I don't know how to get any more simple and basic than that. People coming from outside context with an agenda that may at times be kind of like over performative or whatever. Yeah, I'm going to criticize that. I'm going to subject that to analysis and scrutiny, you know, even if it might, you know, not be what people want to hear. And I think that actually like, and the third leg that I want to introduce, if we were just thinking in terms of like building out some type of majority coalition to do what must be done. If you have, there's like a segment of like the PMC, which like, look, better there than not there. Then there is the front lines of every type of viciousness and evil in this system, like things that everybody experiences to some degree or another, exemplified, you know, amplified on steroids in every possible way. In this, like, I'm tempted to even get into like necropolitics right now with the Achilla Bimbe stuff. Mm-hmm. And then in addition to that, there is this, you know, it's the same, you know, kind of political roadblock of, you know, the resistance, the like, like, hey, people should be protesting. And oh my God, I can't believe that happens. But at the same time, maybe the military should be put out because, you know, things are a little out there. Now, on platforms like this and on social media, of course, it's great to dunk on these people for their naivete and stupidity and, you know, and all of this. But at the same time, I want this to not be another performance that is like, I want this to actually transfer. So, and I have no idea how. I'm just trying to be as honest as I can in my analysis so that maybe there's even a potential of getting there. So when you think of those kind of like three zones that are implicated in this, and I'm just using the three because I'm using like those who are most invested, those who are, you know, at least engaged and not hostile, and those who are theoretically sympathetic to some things. The type of people that, yes, you said abolish the police, they would have no idea what the fuck you're talking about. But if you did say, hey, why can't foot patrols be replaced with social workers, as an example, or, you know, added education funds, or why are nonviolent offenses leading anybody to go to jail? You actually might get some traction with a fair amount of these people. So, and then I'm distinguishing that from another very serious segment of this country that wants to do Palestine in the United States, like overtly. Yeah. So what would your strategy be thinking of those three kind of broad categories? Or is that even, you know, maybe you don't like that way of categorizing it? I'm just trying to think of how to build it out here.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's certainly, I wouldn't go as far as saying that like I have a strategy that I can put forward. Certainly this is, you know, I'm someone who's watching, listening, reading, and learning, right? Just like everybody else. But I think that, first of all, in regards to the sort of first zone that you described, certainly I agree with you that like, if someone is dealing with something, experiencing something that I have not experienced and dealing with it however they can, it is absolutely not for me to judge, right? And it would be incredibly pompous and pedantic for me to say that, oh, I would conduct myself in a way that is more praiseworthy the way they're conducting themselves. I mean, I think that that's disgusting. I absolutely am not going to engage in it. and I think as well, in regards to the second zone, like the sort of managerial class, I think that I think the important thing there is to recognize that you cannot, I don't think it's ever defensible to deny someone a comfort that you have. So I think a good example is you do not get to say that homelessness is inevitable from the comfort of your home. You know, I don't think it's ever defensible to deny someone something that you have. And so I think that I think that comes, somewhat connects to the conversation about like details versus principles, because often the details can make certain things seem, the details can be prohibitive, right? They can make certain things seem incredibly difficult or to enact. Whereas there has to be times where we just assert or demand this will happen. It does not matter how difficult it is to bring about. It will happen because it must happen, because for it to not come about, for it to not occur is indefensible. And then for people who are saying right now, you know, well, I mean, you know, clearly something has to be done. These protests can't go on forever, and the curfew has to be imposed. And maybe the National Guard and the police and the military should go in, because how else are we going to deal with this? Well, they're clearly making an appeal to what they perceive as normalcy, right? And they're saying, well, we need a return to normalcy because that is stable. And so whatever period of instability, of aggression is required to return to that stability that I'm identifying as desirable, is legitimate. But the same argument can be put forward in response, where you're saying what you are identifying as the level of stability that you believe is desirable, from our perspective, is stable, but also uninhabitable, right? It is unacceptable. And so as you've identified yourself, a level of instability or aggressive action is acceptable if it is returning to a desirable place. Well, we're saying the desirable place is much different than what you are identifying, but it is also necessary to push forward to it. And I think it's difficult. It's difficult for some people to accept that, you know, this is the outcome of centuries of entrenched structural racism that has deprived and you know, devastated parts of the world, communities, and has created prosperity and stability for very certain people in very certain places. And so to say that we want to upend that entire system, and that a world that does not, you know, funnel all its prosperity toward particular people, is the only world that we can exist in peacefully, and the only world that we can defend and work toward. It's difficult for people to accept, but is it easier to accept the fact that the poorest and least powerful people in the world are going to die in untold numbers throughout this and the rest of this century and the next one? Is it easier to accept that it is not impossible to imagine that the only people that will be left on the planet a few hundred years from now are people who have sickening levels of wealth and power? I don't know that that's one. I don't know. I certainly don't think it's easier to accept, but I also don't know that that's a world that's worth saving, you know? And so if our task is in this era to like create peace and justice for everyone in the world, and contend with the increasing and extreme and long-term crises of climate change and structural racism and inequality and sexism and ableism, then the actions that we have to take to actually address those crises will necessarily be as grand, as long-term, and as revolutionary as those structures are grand and long-term and entrenched.
Final question I have for you. What about, you're in Canada, obviously. What do you think of the global dimensions of this?
Well, there have been rallies in Canada in solidarity with the protests in the U.S. There's a rally in Vancouver recently, and there are more planned. There was a rally in Toronto as well. Although in Toronto, a 29-year-old black woman named Regis Korchinski-Paquette recently died after an interaction with police. They were called to. There was a mental health support call placed by her mother to the police, and it's not clear what happened. But they arrived at the scene. Korchinski Paquette and her mother and brother were in the hallway when they arrived. She, as the sergeant or the chief of police reported, she asked to go into the apartment to use the bathroom. She went in, police went in with her, and then she fell off the balcony and died. The police don't have body cameras, and so there isn't any footage of what happened. There are some witnesses. They're conducting interviews, but I mentioned that because the march in Toronto was in recognition of her death and calling for accountability in that event, as well as in solidarity with other events. But yeah, I mean, global dimensions of this, like, you know, I would make the argument, and I think it can be very well supported, that anti-Black racism is one of the fundamental engines of the world. It's one of the fundamental mechanisms by which the world operates and has been for centuries. And so it's addressing it, again, will take that sort of incredibly grand movement, but it's not something that's going to be addressed by politicians speaking differently or a legislative measure here or there. We're talking about, if you look at the disparities in well-being, in health outcomes, in education between Europe and Africa, that has to be addressed, right? When we say Black Lives Matter, are we including Africans? Are we including African Caribbeans? Are we including people of African descent everywhere in the world? Because we absolutely have to. And if we don't, then I don't know. I think it's absolutely necessary that we do. And so I think that the global dimensions of this have to be part of the conversation, because it is not acceptable that Africans sit at the bottom of the world as they have for centuries.
And we want no bottom of the world, period, in what the world we want to construct. Right.
Exactly.
Chucka Ejeckam, I really appreciate your time. I hope we can have you on again soon. Stay safe, be well. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, guys, let's take another brief break, yeah? Okay. All right, folks, we'll be right back with Matt Chrisman. Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. Hope everyone is safe and strong. Joining us now is, I'm going to say friend of show, Paisan, and of course, great co-host of Chapo Trap House, Matt Chrisman. Matt, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
How are you?
I'm good. I think I'm like everybody, just sort of stunned and hopeful and of course also terrified.
Right. That's exactly the only sane state to be in. We were just talking about just doing it in the breaks. And look, I think theorizing and thinking critically about things is actually important. And at the same time, I mean, what feeling do you have when you actually go out to these protests?
Well, I just got back from one, and yeah, it is amazing how all of the self-gaslighting that you end up doing by trying to squint through the prism of the internet and make sense of a thing that honestly you'll never be able to really know, melt in the face of an actual an action like that, especially when you see how many people are out there. I mean, just how many people are out there, and how it is really everybody, and that makes you. I don't know how you can have that experience and not think like whatever's coming, you might not know, and I don't think I know, and no one knows. But right here and right now, the only thing to do, the only moral, the only effective thing for you to do to even come close to getting your hands around the moment is to get out there.
It reminds me, this is obviously way bigger. And I'm assuming you were probably there too, when a bunch of people, we all went, and by we, I mean, like, there was tens of thousands of people across the country, and we happened to go to JFK right when they announced the Muslim ban, right after Trump became president. And I remember that, I mean, it was fucking disgusting and terrifying that Trump was president. And I don't run away from my, I was freaked. I didn't have the cool response that apparently we were all supposed to have. I thought it was actually really fucking disgusting that he was president. And we went out and we did that. And, it's like any of those things. It's anytime you are in a line on a street and guys in helmets are telling you to move and you don't, that's fucking scary. Even if you are, relatively speaking, completely, highly insulated. And then over the next couple of days, there was these medium posts, and it was like, no, this is what Bannon wants you to do, man.
Yeah.
And it was like, shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
What this process of being in your head, it is a dialectic though, right? Because then at the same time, the kind of worship of action, okay, any protest, someone gave a cop the finger, the brick went through the window, we're here.
Yes.
No, we're not. But then at the same time, they're like, well, actually, if you're out there, you got to think about what, the Trump reelect numbers, how do we cut out of that fucking dichotomy of the, just the bad legacy of the 60s, the just worship of action for action's sake. And then also just the sort of endless miasma of internet masturbation that keeps you from your fellow humans now.
Yeah. No, you're right. That's definitely the twin pitfalls. I think that right now, one of the main ways you do it is you balance, and the way to balance is what was the state of America right before this? And I know in my heart, it felt like absolute and total paralysis at every level. And if that's the case, then action for action's sake has the benefit of at least breaking through a seeming stalemate. And it's not enough, certainly, and everything has to be worked through as it's happening, but there was no way of thinking yourself out of that stalemate. If we could have, we would have, because everybody's brain was overclocked trying to figure out how to game this, and it wasn't working. And so, these protests are going to have to evolve, obviously. But what's going to make that happen is their perpetuation and people being involved at every level, because the response from the state is going to be terrifying. And I think that the real rubber is going to hit the road in terms of that dialectic of ideas and action moving forward is going to be in how people decide how to respond, because that is going to require more than just action. That's going to require more than simply showing up, because the stakes are going to get higher, and because it's going to be harder to stay out there. And so the question will be, if I want to stay out there, if we feel like this is still worth it, then we're going to have to think harder about what will effectively prevent us from being stuffed back into the bottle by authority. And that can only happen if people are out there first. And then in that crucible, forge new social forms, which we need, because we basically have none.
I love that. We do need to think. If people object to thinking and fetishize the action, then you're just stuck in a loop, which is frankly just going to favor the right because they have the actual literal power right now. People should be under no illusion about that. But if you don't go into the action, that will prevent the capacity to even do the thinking we need to do. I love that.
Exactly. Because I know I felt that way too, just seeing everything pop off suddenly and the instant paralysis setting in of what's the right thing to do? Or even more importantly, what's the right attitude to have towards this? And that honestly, that is the idea that you can ever get close to truth on a level of that through observing through the prism of the internet is a fantasy that the internet promotes, but it's absolutely false. And the way that getting out and into a protest, getting out of the streets is a way to see, oh, this stuff that was weighing on me and preventing me from moving forward, it really doesn't have a lot of purchase when you're actually making decisions that involve other people and that are outside of that frictionless hypothetical plane. And also just this hall of mirrors where everything is true simultaneously.
Right. And that's a problem in our bizarre little space we're in. How does this fit with, how does this, because I said 2 years ago that the right move is, and all of this, and it is like, you could feel it kinesthetically. Yeah. If you talk and think like that, I'll be Jordan Peterson. You're collapsing your shoulders. You're not getting your posture right and going out there and putting on your mask and protesting lynching, which Cornel West clarified for all of us on Anderson Cooper. Thank God people are outside. Thank God we're not so dead and desolate that we haven't gone outside. And I want to actually set this up because this has to do with this Trump clip that we're about to play. I completely agree, even to the point of like happily smacking myself on the wrist, that this overall frame of Trump as a fascist and as an unparalleled authoritarian and all of this has been in the main hugely unhelpful, has empowered some trash politics, has been, embarrassing and ineffective and everything else. And at the same time, guess what? Motherfucker gave an objectively fascist speech last night, and Washington, D.C. is under military control, essentially. So I want to play this, but I also want to use it as an example of, my own wanting to sort of move with the currents versus just saying, well, actually, it's bad. But if you look at, what Obama did, it's like, yes, of course. And this is an escalation. Anyways, this is Donald Trump last night, and I'll throw to you, man.
The riots and lawlessness that has spread throughout our country. We will end it now. Today, I have strongly recommended to every governor to deploy the National Guard in sufficient numbers that we dominate the streets. Mayors and governors must establish an overwhelming law enforcement presence until the violence has been quelled. If a city or state refuses to take the actions that are necessary to defend the life and property of their residents, then I will deploy the United States military and quickly solve the problem for them. First, we are.
Matt.
Yeah.
Thoughts. Thoughts, actions, anything. But I mean, I think that was I just want to say, I think that was, this is what I mean by a certain fluidity. I think that was a step. And I think that we cannot allow all of the stupidity and the melodrama that has happened in the last several years around resistance discourse and elements of left discourse. This was different. I mean, it's on a continuum, but it's an escalation, I think.
It is an escalation. And I mean, obviously Trump is a particularly lurid and grotesque figurehead for this moment, but and I think that has its use. But I think at the same time, it's pretty clear what strikes me, both seeing Trump, not just at that speech, but more the leaked call to the governors, which David Roth very aptly compared to a guy calling into Mike Francesca to complain about the Yankees lineup or something. He just seems like he's yelling at the TV. And then you have these mayors and governors also just kind of it seems like everyone is at the mercy of the only institutions in the cities and in the country that have the funding and legitimacy and actually haven't been completely auctioned off to private interests, which are the cops in the cities and then the military. And I think that what we're seeing is that mask slipping further and further, and that a guy like Trump stands in for a system as opposed to really directing it. And I just, everyone, the fact that the police is the last sort of institution in the country that have any kind of popular legitimacy is genuinely unnerving to me. And it seems like the most dangerous current happening, more so than anything having to do specifically with Trump.
I think you could argue the only institutions that actually properly work right now are the Fed and the military.
Yeah.
On a federal level.
Yes.
Yeah, well, and I'm in 2016. There's this essay by Achille Mbembe, the Cameroonian philosopher, called "The Age of Humanism is Ending," and he basically charted like Palestine is the future for a sort of like global underclass, including recently in the United States. And that absolutely happened before Trump was elected. It's the old, like, symptom or cause thing, which is another sort of like dead end that people still can't seem to get out of.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's what really heartens me is, and I know a lot of leftists would rather not, are resistant to endorse this whole movement because they don't think that it intersects enough with capitalism, right? It is too specifically and narrowly focused on racism and policing. But right. I think once again, that's talking yourself out of noticing what's in front of you, because like a demand to radically reduce police funding or take away their guns or things like that, that is not compatible with the capital hyperaccumulation in America's cities. It completely isn't. It might be framed as like a racial justice thing, but in practice, the reason the cops are like this, the reason they're the only line item in a municipal budgets to go up every year while everything else shrinks, is because they're filling the gap left by the collapse of any kind of social order with police coercion. And it doesn't work without that. It can't work without that. And so not only can the tip of the spear of a broader conflict with capitalism, I was out there tonight and just seeing the wildly diverse group of people protesting, that the opportunity exists for a lot of the suspicion and lack of connection between struggles within different communities that is reproduced by the stratification and the segregation of physical space in cities. This is a chance to actually break it down. This is a chance to actually display for each other across a chasm of like sort of mutual disengagement and mistrust, a commitment to one another that can be built upon.
Yeah, no, and it's the same dynamic, the new thought, the new form. Like, we're going to get post-woke from going there and doing this. Right.
Yeah. Like the woke trap is caused by the anxiety of guilt, the anxiety of helplessness, the fact that you're not doing anything except having opinions. And so those opinions have to be razor sharp and have to be hysterically held to, and witch hunts have to be conducted to purify because of the basic sense of guilt and anxiety that powers them. And those feelings melt away when you aren't just mouthing things, when things aren't just on your computer and in your mouth, when they're in your actual life. All of a sudden, you don't feel the need to reaffirm beliefs because you're actually doing something about them.
Yes, as the Korean Zen slogan stolen by Nike, just do it.
Yes.
I'll keep hammering it. Yeah. So no, I love that. And then I remember I was like, I don't fucking know, but I was at a World Bank protest when I was 16 or something. And I remember this, it was beautiful because this was in my deep and earnest sympathy for hippies right now. This guy who literally smelled of patchouli. And we were like marching up a street, and nowhere near as intense as this, but there absolutely were people, the cops were in riot gear, people were getting beaten up. That was definitely happening. Compared to this, it looks like a picnic, but the trajectory was very defined, even from the, so-called anti-globalization protests. And I remember this guy being like, see, man, we all love each other. And we're like, we could figure it out. And they've only got fear. And I think I left kind of like, yeah, sure. Okay, whatever, dude. Now I look back on it, I'm like, yeah, you nailed it, actually.
Yeah. But the thing that, and the reason that I think people have a justified leeriness about this sort of actionism is that things tend to peter out. That tends to be, that's the nature. You have momentum, you had a steam, and then things, but a lot of the things that cause these things to peter out, namely people have to go to work, people have the feeling that they have something to lose, they have some sort of investment in these institutions that leads them to not want to see too dramatic a conflict with the state. Those things have fallen apart for basically everyone, and it all happened quietly. It all happened during that, under the surface, during that quarantine period. And I don't think any of us were aware of just how much radical alienation was occurring because I know that the cops did most of the smashing and burning in Minneapolis. Of course they did. They love that because it gives them, they think it's going to give them permission to smash everything, and they think it's going to scare everybody back home because, oh, whoa, we didn't want it to get out of hand. But instead what happened is people said, oh, you can burn down a police station? Let's see if we can do that. Because the things that in the past kept people home, kept people from trying to reproduce that kind of escalated conflict are gone. And I don't think that the police really understand that because they still have their jobs. And
they're still some of the only people in the country working. I mean, as actually one of the women, who led a march chant the other day when I was out was like, basically, that was a great talk about material showing up. We're paying your overtime. We are literally paying your fucking overtime. And just to loop into that, I think Alex Perrine made this incredible find. I think it was a letter to the New York Times of some guy who was like, look, in 68, I was out on the streets because of the war in Vietnam and because of civil rights. Now I'm immunocompromised. So I'm at my summer home in Connecticut. Basically, please don't damage my Union Square apartment. And what I loved, but Perrine was totally right. And this is actually, I think this is a serious tension that needs to be thought through, frankly, between like the duality of everyone needs to come together and also like the people who are the most murdered, profiled, and terrorized, and also like the downwardly mobile PMC. That's something that needs to be explored. But one of the things that Perrine said, which was not even funny, just true, that like the decision to not make the guy who is the equivalent of this person in 1968 have a second house in Connecticut is going to lead to this it's just going to keep going. Like, you fucking idiots. You didn't throw any crumbs. Yeah.
And the thing is that that's now off the table. Like those 60s kids, they stopped. Like, what was the response? The riots in the cities, white people just left. And then the white people who were protesting, they stopped the draft. And then they went and lived in those suburbs. A lot of those options are off the table because there's just not the money to go around. Because we're in this clear, defined phase where capitalism is seeking profit through cannibalism. It's cannibalizing the things that make the country work, that make it functional, and that make capitalism a viable economic model, which it inevitably would still do everywhere, but which is in America been staved off for generations by neo-imperialism, by the petrodollar, by Bretton Woods system, whatever. That is all breaking up because we now have we finally have, in effect, a global market. And there are really no more markets to that you can, because to really create markets in places that are under capitalized would require an investment of capital that would be over and above what is even in profit right now. So there's nothing to do. There's no way to buy people off from this.
Yeah, I mean, it really struck me. And look, again, let me try to actually hold some balance. Not everything that President Obama wrote in the Medium post was wrong. Mm-hmm. But the thing that really caught me, and honestly, I probably would have not even mentioned it because it's like it's like, oh, I wrote a Medium post. Like the jokes write themselves, and it's ridiculous. And of course, like, okay, President Obama, I'm gonna produce a Spotify series about how people experience all of this. But what really leapt out at me was when he was talking about the rioting and looting in poorer areas. I was just like, statistics show those grocery stores won't come back. I was like, first of all, of course, right. And maybe that should tell you something about how we design our economies.
Right. And
secondly, and actually way more to the point, in a value system that is much closer to President Obama's, it was like, I wonder what a soon-to-be billionaire multimedia producer could do about that.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. No, I mean, the idea that you're supposed to take away from any observation about the economic damage of looting to what? Stop protesting? So you can ensure that the only thing that comes out of this is bad? So you can ensure that all it's going to do is further immiserate people if you stay home?
And I think, that's really important too in terms of where capital can go. Like what's left is more and more forms of abstraction. Like we can create more technical products that have IP law, and they could just as easily be open, but they're not. They're going to be closed, and we'll squeeze an artificial profit out of it. Then the other part is like the fucking post office, or take another whack at Social Security. You could juice it up. And then the bottom part is the next like genetics revolution. Let's go into the Amazon and, basically like sequence like what remains of ecology for the pharmaceutical industry. Those are really, those are the only three poles that I see left in terms of like where you can juice some money out of. And those are not going to be distributive, obviously.
Yeah, not at all.
Do you see any other areas?
I mean, unless you want to do I think it would all be genetic shit, like Oryx and Crake, walking chicken nuggets or something, because that's about it. But who's going to be able to pay for them? Because that's the thing. You can, we got more IP, we got these drugs that are we can cure your hair loss. It's like, how much will they have to cost to make money? And then who the hell is left with any money to buy anything?
Right. And so what would I'm not like, what would the Keynesian move even be? Because I guess it's like before you even got to rejuicing markets, you could just say, this is what the Financial Times has been saying for 10 years, except until it comes time to kill Corbyn. It's just like, okay, this is all these social trends are in place. So the answer is billionaires should pay a little bit more tax, which the liberal side of the oligarchy entertains until Bernie Sanders or Jeremy Corbyn become actual electoral forces.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
Why has thinking dialectically been so important to you? And break that down for us, please.
What it's really done for me is just made me realize finally and totally, and more importantly, be able to articulate to myself and others more clearly the fundamental sterility of the left as it exists because of its essential virtual nature. That unless you can grind reality against or grind your ideas against the wheatstone of reality and like see a changed situation that they can then be re-engaged with, then you will never be able to get out of the realm of theory. You will never be able to get to action because you will always second guess yourself, because there will always be an argument against whatever it is, whatever the theory, whatever the thing is. And the most dramatic thing to me was just witnessing the sterile mind-killing debates that went on and did not resolve in any way, kind of not resolve, but lose prominence during the height of the Sanders campaign. And then as soon as Bernie's Sanders campaign ended, returned exactly as they had been, without anything having changed. And that really, to me, just drove home the futility of this as a project. But it was very hard for anyone to accept that at a time when the virtual was everyone's entire world, or much more than it was, because as soon as that moment of crisis happens, everyone has to go in their houses, or they have to work all day if they're essential. Either way, any avenue for taking anything offline was gone. And when this happened, I think I don't see this happening in any context other than the quarantine, not just because of the massive economic collapse that's occurring, but also people needed a reason to justify getting out, something that didn't feel selfish, something that felt like it was worth the risk of potentially spreading this disease. And
right.
this finally provided that. And then by doing so, provided people with the thing that they've been missing this entire time, which was a sense that their actions had any impact on the world.
And is it that getting back into actions and the idea that the world is, I mean, you know, I always question how well I articulate this stuff, but like, it's about relationships and dynamic motion, not linear progression, not like an idea that gives us a map, and then we have the map, and then that tells us what it is. And then we can all satiate ourselves, and we can know who's good and who's bad and what to do, and that we get into this actual relationship. And I think, yeah, I mean, that's actually one of the most, and it's funny because that's like entirely missing from American culture, not just the left. And that is why you see it, whether it's new atheism or wokeness, or obviously all of these, you know, fucking neo-fascist currents. It's the idea that the idea is the thing.
Yes, no, that's been it. Like everything has just been the idea, and people just petrifying them into rocks and then bashing each other in the head with them. And now there isn't really an idea in terms of a broader strategy, but the only way to get to that is through application. The only way to get to that. And the thing is, and this is the most important part, and the final puzzle piece for me is that's not guaranteed, of course.
Right.
You can't assume that it'll work, and you can't assume that you will be vindicated. And that is a big problem for a lot of people, because their political sense has been so entwined with being correct and having the right analysis and being credible to themselves or other people, that they are so scared, terrified of being wrong or having their efforts come to nothing. But even if whatever you're doing fails, the assumption that it does not move things forward and that does not change the terrain in such a way that future gains can be made is incorrect. In fact, that's the only way it's ever worked.
And that's where, to me, that's why I keep kind of hitting these spiritual themes, for lack of better words, because it's in that sort of basket of ideas and practices, for all their flaws. It's another fucking dialectic. But it is the zone that you can get into, or a way of getting into, with being okay with being wrong and not being a fanatic.
Yeah.
And then also having courage, frankly.
Yes. Courage to risk something for yourself. Courage to not just fight for other people in the now, but fight for people who haven't even existed yet. The idea, accept that you might not see anything like what you want to happen. You might never be vindicated in your lifetime, but that's still worth pursuing. And that is hard for Americans specifically, because as the spiritual has been drained from life, it's been replaced with things. And things have taken, and therefore the indulgences of the senses is the only value that any of us have, consciously or subconsciously, which means that our fear of losing them is dominant over everything, and more powerful even than our fear of authority is our fear of losing these things that provide us with our only sense of worth or only sense of purpose, and the process of like reawakening a spiritual sense is most importantly about reawakening a sense of the value of others. The value of others is as ends to themselves, the value of humans as the species and as the planet. Like these things have to have meaning to you beyond the place where you get your stuff. You know, these things have to have a meaning to you that you connect to. The idea that you're part of a greater whole. The idea that you are part of an ecumenical, whatever it is. It might be humanity. It might be the planet. It might be the universe. Whatever it is, you have to feel a part of something, and you have to feel that the benefit to others is also a benefit to you, even if you don't feel it in the immediate material reward that you might see in your life.
That's it. I love it. So what we're going to do, folks, Matt, you're going to spend a little bit of the post game with us, which I much appreciate. We'll take a little bit of a break. We'll probably start the post game in about 5-10 minutes, or 10 minutes, I should say. But folks, keep this short and sweet. Stay safe, stay strong, be well. I want to thank each and every one of you in every facet of this for making this possible and supporting this. We hope that this obviously reverberates onto you. I want to thank Matt and David, of course. And, I actually, this last 2-part episode we had on for the illicit history on what happened in Russia in the 90s and the creation of modern PR with Mark Ames, very relevant to now. Check it out and watch the Thomas Sankara mini doc that will actually inspire you. Thank you to Milton Alamati so much, as always, and of course, Vic Viana. All right, patreon.com/TMBS, and send us your recommendations for where to put resources towards bail funds and other things like that. Much love, everybody. Stay safe. We'll see patrons in the post game in about 10 minutes.